Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadare Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhuvevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. My Dandavat Pranam devotees, Dandavat Tirtha Prabhu. So, this is a very short video, and it is to give some response to some things that were sent to me and something that I viewed earlier today, and I just wanted to, in a very concise way, take a look at a specific section of something I've been speaking on topically for the last so many weeks. Haribol Ram Gopalji. So, the subject is a parent, I should have put, bad experiences in pursuit of practicing bhakti. So I've already done a number of videos and also Harikatha at our temple here, kind of covering the subject of the psychology of the practice of bhakti. Dandavat Sandhira Didi. So I'm pointing out here just one particular segment in particular, which is reactions to bad experiences in the pursuit of bhakti. And the reason I'm taking this particular section is because almost universally I have observed, first of all, I should have, besides giving Vaishnav Pranam, I should have also glorified Sri Madhavatiti Ekadasi for those whose day today is Ekadasi Vrat. So, back again to our subject, that almost universally, I've noticed that many of the, quote, modernized or progressive or any other nomenclature you want to attach to it, ways at which people look to adjust bhakti, considering that there must have been some factors about bhakti that were either incongruent with its ideals or were not actually, what they thought bhakti was. So what I'm trying to say is that many people, when they have bad experiences due to the mal-application, either institutionally or in any other social dynamic, they get some mal-application of bhakti as an experience. They attribute that mal-application of bhakti to bhakti itself. So I did bring this up in both the classes on the psychology of bhakti and in the Harikatha that I had done Sunday at our Radha Govind Mandir here in Alachua. So what seems to happen is that people either joined any sangha, primarily I've seen in devotees who have joined, especially in ISKCON, post the Samadhi of Srila Prabhupada, and they had experiences with many of the things which we socially identify as being very unhealthy. Whether it's male chauvinism, or whether it's the treatment of women or children, or whether it is the view on sexual orientation, or whether it is the view of sexuality, means in terms of the strictness of celibacy and sex for only for procreation. So I've mentioned many of these things in previous videos. So anyway, having looked at some difficulty that they experienced within any institution regarding any of these things, they then thought they either thought it or imposed it, that this is actually a fault in the practice of Gaudiya Vaishnavism or Bhakti. And some people have even gone back and taken a look and said, well, you can historically trace many of these things as well. And generally, almost universally, again, what happens is that some kind of collective is formed around and with other people who have experienced something negative as far as the malapplication of Bhakti. And in that collective, there are discussions of how to seemingly change Bhakti itself. I don't see so much change of the application, but change of Bhakti itself, because somehow or another it was gleaned that whatever the fault was, whatever the difficulty was, whatever the malapplication was in Bhakti, not in the individual's institution that was misapplying Bhakti. Sometimes that's recognized also, but the dominant theme is something is there in Bhakti. So I wanted to speak a little bit about understanding the difference between reactions to malapplication of Bhakti and the inability to catch the full spirit of the practice of Bhakti because of one's own subjective evolution in the process. In other words, sometimes people will see a malapplication, and rather than to adjust in relation to Bhakti as a whole, for one, they may not have really gotten a real glimpse of what is real Bhakti, because if you were in a situation where there was malapplication, it could very well indicate that the association that you had was of persons who were not steeped in the actual essence of pure Bhakti. And therefore you didn't see pure Bhakti, you only saw that malapplication. That's one factor. But even where one perceives in a place and in the association of those who are in fact realized souls, and they are getting the sense of pure Bhakti, they may not be able to adjust their own subjective evolution in the process. And therefore they also get a sense of, well, Bhakti needs to be adjusted because I am somehow or another undergoing distress, either psychologically or emotionally, due to things which I thought were meant to give me bliss or happiness. So the only way that a person can truly, and I've mentioned this many times, and I've also spoken recently, how it is the most difficult aspect of Bhakti, yet it is the first anga of Bhakti, and is also considered the doorway to Bhakti, which is Saranagati. To do Saranagati essentially means giving up self-interest, and that is such a difficult thing to do. Giving up self-interest means the application of false ego in the sense of kartitva or doership based on false ego now has to be given up. And that's extremely hard to do if we've cultivated that particular sense of activity from time without any beginning. And the jivas have been in the cycle of samsara from anadikal. So because this has been something that has been a habitual standard in our lives, then when we get to that place where we're knocking on the door of mature bhakti, it is very difficult because mature bhakti requires, oh, there must be saranagati. Interest in bhakti does not require that. Chatu vidaya bhajante mam. So many different kinds of people may come to approach bhakti. Those who are inquisitive, those who are under distress, those who are pursuing wealth, and those who have some gyan or influence from previous sanskars who realize the quality and the nature of bhakti and want to pursue it based on that gyan, but don't have yet adhikar to realize bhakti completely. But they have knowledge what is the value of bhakti, so they take up the pursuit. So it is not that every single person who comes to bhakti has come under the same motivation. You understand? So when people even come in a situation where pure bhakti is being dispensed by any pure Vaishnava or under the influence of that pure Vaishnava, and people in their subjective evolution in the process have not yet been able to get to the point of being able to give up that self-interest motivated by false ego, then so many kinds of confrontations come with the process, and those persons also begin to assess that, oh, something should be adjusted in bhakti, because still the basis of my self-interest was not fulfilled here. You understand? So something must be adjusted in bhakti. Perhaps it is the rigidity of bhakti. Perhaps it is the whole idea of the need to give up self-interest and false ego. Why should I have to do that? These are all the various things that arise in the consciousness of a person who's having that struggle. So rather than seeing events that unfold in bhakti according to tate anukampam susumikshmani, right? According to seeing things according to atmakritam vipakam. In that shlok it mentions atmakritam. Whatever's going on in my process is the result, atmakrit, of things that I had done that are producing in this particular life at this particular time a certain set of circumstances. Pure bhakti remains in an absolute state, and I'm going to address that in a minute. Remains in an absolute perfected state, swata siddha. But my inability to catch that state of perfection is hampered by my unwillingness to give up self-interest based in false ego. Like the classic example of putting the hand in the cookie jar, grabbing the cookie, and not being able to then get your hand out of the jar. You understand? So then so many different things come. I had the desire to eat this cookie, and now this jar is giving me so many problems. So the process is fraught with some kind of faults, and it has to be adjusted. You understand? So we don't think the adjustment needs to be within myself. How to get the cookie out without the methodology that I'm trying to approach it with, but rather something needs to be adjusted in how the cookies were stored, to just stretch this example out to its limits. You understand? So again, bhakti is an absolute process, and the reason this is important to address is because though bhakti is absolute, our experiences are all subjective, meaning they're related to our own particular material samskars and bhakti samskars. I also spoke on this both in the Psychology of Bhakti class and also at the temple on Sunday. We all have our individual material karmic portfolio. We as well have praktanic samskars, means previous samskars in bhakti in most cases, and also adunik. Adunik means present, material and spiritual impressions. So these things are always going on simultaneous tracks, and I mentioned occasionally, just like in a track layout on a railway system, sometimes those tracks cross. So the example here that I'm using is for the purpose of showing how sometimes there is a bumping of heads or a clash between our material impressions, which are based in self-interest, and the spiritual impressions, which are in pursuit of pure bhakti. So when that happens, it is of necessity at those junctures to then not look at a fault in the track layout. It's important at that point to then, to take a look at how much self-interest and false ego are blocking the ability to see that this is tate anukampam sushumikshmani. Right? That this is something that has to be tolerated because it's part of my unfoldment. Bunja eva atma kritam vipakam. That this is due to my own atmakrit. It means the combination of my material and spiritual influences previously and now. All these things were the accumulation of my own activities. So when there's either the actual malapplication of bhakti and someone is emotionally or psychologically damaged by that, or whether or not, which in almost all cases is a combination of both things, there's a subjective evolution of our own unfoldment in bhakti, and those crossroads of material and spiritual influences have bumped heads, so to speak, we have to be able to first go to the true mechanism of reconciliation for these things, which is, what is it in me at this time that's giving rise to my experience? If we attribute that it's an outside influence of something incorrect, maladjusted in bhakti itself, it will be aparad to bhakti. And it will further complicate our situation. And when the situation becomes further complicated, rather than, this is the nature of false ego, rather than realizing at that time, oh, my false ego is actually creating more complication, we double down on self-interest and false ego, and we begin to look at ways to then put bhakti in a relative position. Because if the absolute becomes relative, then there is no standard. Because now everything becomes subjective. How I view bhakti is my own subjective reality. And therefore how I will approach it will take bhakti from the absolute perspective into my relative consideration, and I will adjust it. So in one sense, it's that sort of final conquest of the false ego. No, I will relativize bhakti and make bhakti adjustable to my happiness. You understand? So this is kind of what is going on in some circles. This is not happening in a void, however. I've mentioned also on maybe 2 previous lectures regarding the same subject matter, how much social engineering has a lot to do with this, because the environment itself is becoming like that. The entire environment in Kali Yuga cannot facilitate Kali unless the absolute truth is either checked or relativized. You cannot check absolute truth, because absolute truth has absolute power. So you can't check it. But what you can do is weaken it by relativizing it. Therefore, much of social engineering that would like to introduce the very things that we read are the hallmark qualities of Kali Yuga are introduced not by attacking the idea of absolute truth, but by relativizing it. One example. If you say that the nature of God is up for debate because it's a matter of subjective belief, and you're able to establish that in the social fabric, you've just relativized the absolute truth. Because either God is, and according to the definition of what is God, it is absolute. So if God is absolute, there's no question of existence or non-existence for God. It's an absolute fact. But if in the social fabric, I could make the subjective experiences of people more important than God's existence or not, I have successfully relativized God. You cannot check God completely, but I've put it in a relative position, which means that some people could say, well, you feel this way about a particular thing because you believe in God. I happen not to necessarily believe in God, or my belief has many subjective levels of, well, I'm not atheist, but I'm agnostic, but I'm this, I'm that. In so many ways, some relative relationship to accepting the absolute nature of God. But I don't accept God as an absolute thing to be a determinative in how I conduct my life or how the society should be conducted. Even the idea of a separation of church and state as the principle of understanding all religious pursuits have validity and not giving credence to one over another, that idea by the state is actually proper rulership. The idea that church should have nothing to do with the state of affairs of the state is actually atheism. And therefore it opens the door for those who espouse that on the basis of governance. Those who espouse like that open the door for all of the features of Kali Yuga. Is it not evident now? So my point here being that those who have bad reactions, first of all, have to identify the source of giving them that reaction. And the first and foremost thing is to clearly separate malapplication from Bhakti itself. Perhaps it means that the association you had was not one in which pure Bhakti was being displayed or disseminated. Perhaps also in that environment, perhaps institutional consideration was more prominent than Bhakti considerations. And under all of these circumstances, you yourself may have had a bad experience. Also, you do have to acknowledge what I was mentioning, atmakritam, your own activities and where that has put you subjectively in relation to the absolute truth of Bhakti. Without doing that, you'll always consider your own subjective experience to be absolute and Bhakti to be something to be adjusted to it rather than vice versa. And almost universally, as I mentioned, I've seen so many people who had some experience in Bhakti at some point. Generally, it's post Srila Prabhupada Samadhi. Generally, right? Even though there are some from during the time of Srila Prabhupada, but almost a lot is post Srila Prabhupada's Samadhi. And they've had some very negative encounter, experience, observation, whatever it might be. In many cases, another thing that happens is people look for not only validation of the fact that the experience was negative, but how they themselves can create alternatives. But they feel they need to have some authority backing them. Because, of course, in Bhakti, there's the whole thing of the vetting process of Guru, Sadhu, and Sastra. Right? So people stand on everything based on Guru, Sadhu, and Sastra. Even misinterpretation of Guru, Sadhu, and Sastra. Right? But if a person themselves are either not very steeped or only slightly understanding Bhakti theology, they look to bolster their position, not necessarily by a depth of more understanding of the theology of Bhakti, but by going back into the academic community and getting validated by the academic community. Yes, I am now a PhD holder in theology or philosophy or Sanskrit studies or any number of things related to the field. Now, the person comes back to the table with a sort of, a more bolstering of the false ego, because now I've been validated by another community, the academic community, that what I'm speaking on has the sense of backing of my degree, which was given to me by all of these different people and all of their different vetting sources. So you'll find there's a great deal of quoting of all kinds of persons who we don't really know what their standing was in self-realization in relation to pure love of God, but some points are extracted from whatever their philosophical conclusions were, because that was presented in the academic pursuit, right, over 4 years or whatever. When I was in school, I took Philosophy 101. I'm just giving one experience. The first day of the class, professor stands in front of class and says, this class is not meant to answer questions, right? It's meant to pose them, right? So, sounds deep, right? But actually, the purpose of human life is to find answers to the questions of life, not to simply pose more questions for intellectual gymnastics or intellectual enjoyment. Now, I do want to caveat one thing here. Myself and my friend were both taking the same class. We went to visit. After some time, we became familiar with that professor on a more intimate level, friendship level. And we actually went to visit him at his home. I remember cooking some prasad, to give to him and everything. And just in talking, he actually had looked at Bhagavad Gita, had great interest in things like that. But his academic role had a certain kind of framework. And remember, I'm not dating myself, but this was in the 70s, right? So, but he had a certain framework to work within according to his academic position. So he had to kind of separate his personal interest from his academic position. and present that really the basis of philosophy, according to him, was to pose questions, not to really get answers, right? So, in the same way, it's another feature of relativizing things, because actually, true philosophical pursuit, even educational, the word education comes from a Latin word, educare, which means to bring out that which is within. So how can there be education that doesn't even deal with the soul? That's first of all. Secondly, how can there be education in philosophy that does not truly understand the highest ideal of the soul? Yet, the basis of that will give validation to someone. Well, here, we're going to give you a degree that says you essentially have not only mastered, but doctoral degree is even higher than a master's degree. We're giving you the highest recognition to validate your subjective experience, backed and bolstered by our academic indoctrination or education. Really, maybe not education, because I mentioned, doesn't necessarily bring out the depth from what's within, because the depth of what is within hasn't been reached, because the soul level hasn't been reached, right? That's not what's presented in most universities. And I'd be willing to vet anybody who's going, I don't know about modern day, of course I went to college in the 70s. So, but in contemporary education also, I would say there's very little actual education on the absolute nature of the soul and all the varying things related to it. You understand? Most of it deals with philosophical concerns based on sort of, the template established by ancient or contemporary academia, right? It's not really based necessarily on some absolute spiritual foundation, right? So, my point being, back to my original point, many people who have had a bad experience, one of the things they take shelter of is, again, to bolster a platform from which to, again, come and speak out on what they perceive to be a fault in Bhakti, is to get bolstering from the academic validation of, well, I went to college now, and now I'm a PhD, and like I said, theology, philosophy, religious studies, whatever it might be, Sanskrit, whatever it might be, and now I'm come back to the table to give my analysis with that backing. And because I have that backing, maybe I'm not really questionable as it would have been when I was just Bhakti John in the temple looking at these things. You understand? Mm-hmm. So, in this way, a further relativizing of absolute truth can take place. You understand? Or attempt to anyway. And what that does is it goes down a track then to further expand relativizing things to a point where you find that any and everything that any person subjectively comes up with will now find a place in the absolute truth. And a pushback against that will be considered either archaic or uninformed, or it's due to a lack of not having had that academic experience that you had, and your sources of validation being very myopic or narrow, because you're only saying Gaudiya Acharyas and their perspective. So Guru Sadhu Sastra primarily in Gaudiya line, right? So if that is your vetting process, it for one is very narrow because it's one stream, and secondly, it may give rise to, in their opinion, myopic views that you can only see from this one angle of vision. But I think it was Srila Bhakti Rakshak Shri Goswami Maharaj, he mentioned a very interesting thing, and I can't remember it clearly. He mentioned there are three planes: the plane of exploitation, I think it was the plane of investigation, I'm not sure, but still it's a suitable position, and the plane of dedication. So he said on the plane of exploitation, people's self-interest is prominent, and therefore the ability to understand and digest absolute truth is very difficult. On the plane of investigation, the influence, as I always mention here, of material and spiritual pursuits coming together creates a position that is in pursuit. It's an investigation of the absolute truth, and because it's in the position of investigation, it doesn't always have solid conclusions. Because the nature of realizations come at the time when the practice of bhakti reveals, because this is a descending, avarohan panta, it is a descending process. So at the time that bhakti reveals is when realization begins, right? Or starts, right? So that happens in the platform of dedication. Oh, Yashodhari Didi is on. I think maybe she can give me the actual thing. What is it? He said exploration, renunciation, and dedication. These things. So exploration is like investigation. So very good. Bipin Bihari Babu. Oh, I wish devotees would hear from this devotee so much. Right? I have so much enthusiasm in hearing his Harikatha, everything. So yes. So the plane of exploitation, it cannot reveal anything. The plane of exploration or investigation, some things are understood, but until one does saranagati or goes to the platform of dedication, the true revelation of absolute truth does not come. You understand? And therefore, in that plane of exploration, right, there's the possibility of so much subjective consideration coming in, because the false ego has not been subjugated by dedication. Even Prahlad Maharaj mentions in Shravan, Kirtan, Vishnu Smaran, Parasevam, etc., until Ittipumsa Prita Vishnu, until their saranagati, the ability of the processes of bhakti, right? Your bhajan sadhan cannot give revelation until their saranagati, because there'll be obfuscation by the false ego. Because on the chitta is the whole mahatattva, and part of that is the subtle element called ahamkara. Understand? Born of avidya creates 5 things. Avidya itself, asmita. So I've mentioned on many previous lectures, asmita means, asmi means I am. Ita is a condition, the condition of being something that you're not. By constitution, we're dasosmi. By asmita, we think aham. Right? So asmi is then bolstered by its connection with ahamkara. Aham, karana, and karaka. I am the doer and the cause of everything. So that ahamkara is the obfuscating factor in allowing bhajan to come in, and for the atma and the nature of Swarup Shakti inherent in bhajan to become taratmik. That's what happens in bhajan siddhi. The atma and Swarup Shakti become taratmik. Rup Goswami Pad has clearly explained this in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. After quoting the verse Sudha Sattva Viseshatma Prem Suyaksa Samyabha, 2, maybe 3 verses later, he quotes Avir Bhuya Manovrito. How when Swarup Shakti descends, it completely takes over the chitta and becomes one with it. You understand? So, it's not possible to really assess and respond appropriately to experiences we've had that are, quote, bad experiences, again with the malapplication of bhakti, right? If we confuse it for actually some bad experience with bhakti itself, because then bhakti means Bhakti Devi, means Radhika, some aparad is inherent in that thinking. You understand? And therefore no ability to experience Bhakti Devi will come. So that's one thing. Secondly, in our own subjective unfoldment, we have to acknowledge our inability to get past a certain experience because of the nature of false ego holding on to the idea that my own position is also equal to the position of bhakti, even at this time of my not being realized. And that's why you'll see in some cases also, people will leave the path of bhakti in pursuit of another religious experience. Because on the path of bhakti, there's no prospect for doing anything until and unless you become saranagat. And giving up the false ego completely is just, in some people's unfoldment at this time, not possible. So they want a religious position or religious experience which will accommodate the compromise between their own self-interest and spiritual life. And bhakti is demanding the unequivocal surrender of everything. You understand? That is a really heavy thing when you knock on that door and you're saying, I want everything. The highest possible experience of love. You understand? I want the highest possible experience of love. Then give everything. Oh, no, but I want to keep, to some degree, my own thing intact. So another feature you'll find where relativization of bhakti goes on is the attempt to equate the relative experiences in the material world with the absolute experiences in the spiritual paradigm. So I heard one person, I never speak names about anything, one person trying to equate the idea of praying and the unfoldment of the Kam Krida of Sri Radha Krishna with mundane sexuality. And then a further elucidation that person was given, because the person was kind of speaking about the nature of the problematic nature of male dominance, right? So one of the things they brought up was that in Gaudiya theology, those who are males in this world, due to, I guess, in particular he mentioned that they were cis males, which means, I guess, those who have subjective and objective identification with the gender they were born with, or the gender they were in this karmic iteration having, right? So he was saying that as a result of, I guess, what he considers socialization and masculine toxicity, that's a whole word now, masculine toxicity, if that's the right phrase, right? Because of that, they want to have control. So he was equating that many Gaudiya practitioners in male forms aspire for Manjari Bhav because it is the highest position in the spiritual world, not because of any true resonance or any true experience born from a ruchi from previous life, but mostly it's a psychological phenomenon of wanting still to have a dominant position. And in the spiritual paradigm, that is a dominant position to have sway of the ability to vicariously or directly have intimate sexual experience with Krishna. So it's just complete sort of what is called Vivasta Grant. Vivrata Gyan. Vivrat means to reverse things. You understand? So it means to flip things upside down. So to completely associate mundane, masculine ahamkara with the transcendental nature of either true aspiration or actual realization of Manjari Bhav, right? This is the length to which these kind of experiences have driven people when they're not properly dealt with. So how an association can be made that the thrust of the aspiration for Manjari Bhav, right? Now let me give a caveat here, because maybe this is some way to give some degree of leeway to this person, that they mentioned in the very beginning of their talk that they were doing general speaking, right? So obviously they accommodated their individual experiences. But the problem here is that you cannot even put a general stamp on the idea that most males pursuing Manjari Bhav is not because of the nature of the evolution of their bhakti due to a particular ruchi, right, that they have, but is really come about as some psychological connection with their toxic masculinity, that's the phrase, in this world that they're trying to transfer into the spiritual dimension. So anyways, my point here being, and I don't want to go so many tangents because we'll lose focus here, but the real thing is, which I put in the title here, the need to understand the ways in which people respond to, quote, bad reactions in bhakti has to be framed by clearly understanding what is the malapplication of bhakti or subjective evolutionary experience in bhakti versus the nature of absolute and pure bhakti itself. That's the sum and substance of what I'm trying to explain with all of this. There's a very much of a need to be clear that pure bhakti is filled. Even the name, which is an aspect of pure bhakti, Namnam Akari Bahuda Nija Sarva Shakti. Nija here is very important word in this shlok, because Mahaprabhu was saying, right, Nija Sarva Shakti. So just as a more esoteric understanding, Mahaprabhu wrote Shishashtikam in an earlier part of his Leela, but he recited it in the Antya Leela after hearing the sonnet of Advaita Acharya to wind up his pastimes. Immersed in the deep moods of separation that Radhika feels, he wrote out the Shishashtikam and recited it. You understand? So there's very deep meaning here. It means the pinnacle of all bhakti, Nija Shakti, is placed in Nam. Meaning that this was Mahaprabhu's gift, that in Sri Nam, the full realization up to Bhakti Naipunya. Praying Purushottam Mahaprabhu. How praying? Shri Radha Pranaya Vikriti Ladini Shakti Ashmad. How this praying has taken the Radha Krishna's Swarup of Ashra and Vishaya Jatiya and brought Rasaraj and Mahabhav into one roop. The very deep concepts of praying. All of that is realizable in the Nam that Mahaprabhu gave in his Leela. Such high class of thing. Very high class. So my point here being, from that level of appreciation, we cannot diminish what is pure bhakti by a push of relativism based on people's bad reaction to what I've already described innumerable times as malapplication of bhakti, either some insufficient sangha related to pure bhakti, or one's own subjective evolution of having not yet come to a point to see the nature of reactions is coming from their own previous activities. So I'm going to end here because certainly I have gotten behind my services. I did not mean to go this long. I always say in the beginning things will be short, but then inevitably so many things unfold. So my Dandavat Pranam to many devotees, and of course my also deep appreciation of the mood of sorrow to Yashodhari Didi for the disappearance of Srila Bhakti Jivan Acharya Maharaj. So I'm offering my deep heartfelt condolences here also. And also to Bipin Bihari Prabhu, please, I'm hoping to hear your Hari Katha again very soon. And to all the devotees who came on, Lakshman Prabhu, Draupadi Didi, and many others. Rasangi, I think I saw her on. And any other devotees who came on, please give me your kripa to go on continuing, trying to serve my Guru Pada Padma and our Guru Vargas. Jai Vancha Kalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhuvevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Radhe Radhe. Yes, Lakshman Prabhu, very good point. Yeah, possible lack of sincerity could be there. Yes, many analysis. Jai Hari Bo Radhe Radhe.